Howdy doody, Buckaroonies, and welcome back to another episode of Morning Coffee with Cameron. One time, when I was around maybe 10 years old, I was hanging out with my dad and he was showing me how to play some stuff on guitar. And he said, "Hey, do you want to see how to play a little bit of Eruption by Van Halen?" And of course, my 10-year-old self was like, "Hell yeah, dude, that sounds dope." So he picks up his guitar and he starts tapping on the neck, playing these arpeggios. And my mind was like, because I had no idea you could even do that. In a couple of recent streams, and maybe in a couple of recent videos, I did something with Pigments that got some questions in the chat and in the comments, and even a couple of DMs saying, "Hey, I didn't know Pigments could do that. Hey, how do I do that with Pigments? Hey, how can I make Pigments do that?" And today I wanted to sit down and just film a short video to show you a pretty cool and sort of maybe unknown feature of Pigments that you can go try right now that's pretty fun, and I think can be especially inspiring if you're stuck maybe with a little bit of writer's block. Okay, here we are. I've got 3 instances of Pigments set up here. Each of these is then routed to feed the output into this instance of Dune 3. Now I'll talk about why I've got 3 of these going here in a bit, but what we're going to do is play a chord. Pigments is then going to process the incoming MIDI information, do some stuff to it, and then of course spit it out and pipe it into Dune 3 here. So let's play a chord and see what happens. Move on to a different chord. Let's keep on trucking along here. Bring it on home. And I think you get the idea. This is a really cool and maybe, I don't know, I hate to use the word like hidden because that implies this is like secret producer trap beat hack 2020. They don't want you to know sort of thing, but maybe rather a bit of an overlooked and somewhat unknown feature of Pigments. And I think it's really cool, and that's why I wanted to share it with you and teach you how to do this. Before we break down how this works and why, I just want to say up front here that how you do this is going to depend on your DAW. If you're not sure how to route the output information of Pigments into a plugin, you'll probably want to check out the manual for your DAW and look for information on how to route the MIDI output of a MIDI track, a MIDI tool, or MIDI instrument into another instrument or into a hardware instrument running inside of your session. Okay, so to do this from scratch, we're just gonna load up a new instance of Pigments on the default preset. It doesn't really matter. Now what we're going to do is disable both engines. So right now, if I play this, obviously nothing happens. So what we're going to do is move over to the sequencer tab here, and we can actually output both the arpeggiator and the sequencer of Pigments and feed it to whatever we want. In Bitwig, there are 2 ways to do this. I can either place Pigments on an instrument track like this and then put another instrument after it, or I can go to the routing over here, and instead of sending this to the master output, I can send this to a plugin. I'm gonna send this to Dune 3. Okay, so now this is hooked up and routed and ready to go. But once again, if I play something, nothing happens quite yet. That's because we need to enable the arpeggiator or sequencer inside of Pigments. At this point, you might be asking yourself, well, my synth has an arpeggiator or a sequencer built in. Why would I want to use this? And that's because Pigments does some interesting and kind of spicy things that make it a bit more unique to use for these purposes. Now that I've got this hooked up, I can just arm Dune 3 and hold down a note, and away we go playing the sequencer. If we play a different note, it's going to play using that note, and that's going to be important here in a sec. So let's start things off by just entering a quick sequence. I don't really care what. This is going to sound like a hot mess, but that's fine. Now what we could do here is go in and change the scale. So I'm going to set this to maybe just the natural minor scale. Cool. Now we can add randomization to this. So I'm going to increase this, and now we're going to get a generative sequence that's going to be quantized to natural minor. We can take this further by maybe randomizing stuff like velocity and the octave and even the probability of a trigger occurring. So let's just go and kind of like scrub through something here. And now we've got something kind of cool going on. And this goes a lot further. We can start regenerating stuff. So I'm just gonna have this regenerate actually every 16th note. It's just gonna regenerate all of these random values. And that way we'll just get a forever changing and looping sequence. Now, if there was a certain step that was very important, you can also go in here and lock it. So if you wanted it to always hit on a C and you wanted it to always occur at this octave, you can lock that here. But this is where it gets a bit more interesting in my mind, is just letting it run and create something new. Now, of course, the polyrhythm tool allows you to go a little bit further with this. So I'm going to realign this every 4 bars and enable polyrhythm mode. And I'm gonna start adding divisions here. So I'm gonna divide this by 2. Let's divide this by 3. And I guess maybe we'll do some random slides here. I don't know. And then we'll divide that by 5. And now all of these sequencer steps are running at different rates, which can give you a lot more interesting stuff inside of all of this. And what's more, you could even go in here and let's say take LFO 3 and tie this to the rate of this whole thing. So now this is gonna play back and move faster and slower. Now, by using something a bit more interesting, like let's say one of the random generators here and tying that to the sync as well, I'm gonna go into Dune here and just disable this delay and reverb for the sake of hearing this a bit more clearly. Now we've got something that's gonna be really random and generative and interesting. This can get very chaotic and very wild, or be very stable and very melodic. It's a lot of fun to experiment with this. So that on its own is cool, and the arpeggiator functions in much the same way. We just lose the sequencer here. It's just gonna play an arpeggio based on whatever I'm feeding it. So let's up this sync here maybe to something like 1/8 notes. I'm going to set the mode to be random, and now we've got a randomized ARP that's gonna be across random octaves with some subdivisions and polyrhythm things going on, and it's gonna be really cool. So I'm just gonna hold down C minor chord with the 3rd above. So that's giving me something a lot more interesting than a traditional arpeggio, and because the probability is being regenerated constantly, it's never going to be quite the same. Now, where this becomes cool, because I know some people are turned off by the idea of generative tools that are forever changing, you can actually record the MIDI out. So you could record this and then find little sections and segments you like, and then splice them together to make the final part. To provide a bit more of an in-context example result that you might get from doing this, I'm gonna turn on the reverb and the delay on that once again, hold down that same chord, and that's gonna take a simple input chord, and we've got a really cool sequence here that can really be inspiring, you know? I might have no idea what I want to lay down, but if I can get a basic groove and a mood going with something that simple, just holding down 3 notes, that's a really powerful tool. So now that you know how to use this, what am I doing with 3 instances of Pigments? So this is where this gets kind of fun, I think. If I open up this first instance here, we'll have to shrink this down because for some reason Pigments likes to be just gigantic all the time. On this first layer, I'm running an arpeggiator and I'm randomizing stuff. I'm even randomizing the sync quite a bit. So that's gonna give me one kind of row of stuff going. So that's gonna be moving around a ton. This second instance, gotta resize this once again. Going over here, I've got this set to a different rate. So this is running on dotted eighths. Maybe we could even change this one to be random mode. And then this third layer, I've got this running Again with a giant skin for no reason. Going into the sequencer, I'm running this at a different rate as well and just randomize some of this other stuff. So this one, I gave it a lower base probability, so this one probably isn't going to occur all the time. We could even go in and further randomize this by enabling the polyrhythm mode, adding regen, and so on and so on. So by adding 3 layers, now I get polyphony. With all that in mind, going off what we did earlier, where we had just a simple input, a C, a G, and then an E flat up above, now we've got 3 layers of that going on, so there's potential for polyphony and interesting rhythmic overlaps by adding different subdivisions and whatnot. We can take something super simple and give ourselves the perfect spark of inspiration for a new track. I am super into tools like this. Anything involving generative, chance, or just general computer-assisted composition is fascinating stuff to me because it's like having a co-writer with you every time you sit down to write a track that forces you to explore and experiment with some maybe rather unconventional ideas and stuff you just would have never thought to write yourself, or something that is seemingly very calculated, and it's interesting to blend more human, organic elements with things like this that feel very, rigid and digital and almost mathematically constructed. So I think this is a great feature that everyone should know about. And that's really it. I know this was kind of a short video, but I hope you found it interesting and I hope you find this helpful, because I think this is a super cool feature that a lot of people just, I guess, don't really know about. And I think it's very powerful and can really help you strike up some inspiration when you're just in a bit of a rut. And I think we all need that now and again. Pigments is, of course, available right now if you want to check it out. There's a link down below. I really do recommend it. It is a hell of a synthesizer, and it's pretty frequently updated by Arturia and packs in just a ton of features, and they do some pretty major updates to it relatively frequently that add a lot of new features and functionality, making it a pretty good bang for the buck value synthesizer that covers a whole lot of ground. With that, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. And of course, as always, I hope this inspires you to get out there and make something awesome.